Hello everybody and welcome back to more of our player guide series. My name is Zen and I'm going to be walking you through one of the most important guides in this entire series, which is about leadership. Now this guide will be broken into two different parts because there's so much to talk about. So part one will be more about what makes a good leader and what makes a bad leader, and part two will be more about how to actually do it, how to put into effect some of the things we've talked about in this first part, and some new things that we'll talk about in the second part. And while this guide is specifically targeting leadership within MMOs, you can take most of these principles into the real world, and many people, in fact, who play MMOs and are guild leaders of, the top guilds on certain servers or even, the best raid teams out there, they'll put that on their resumes or CVs, and the chances of them actually getting a job based on that stuff is fairly likely. It can be perceived as pretty nerdy by some employers, but most employers will find it very impressive. So this stuff is actually useful, outside of just the game. So I'm giving you life tips now. To start, I did want to briefly talk about my experiences as a leader and how I've managed to become a leader, and also what I've learned. So I've been really fortunate to have gone to countless leadership conferences and been invited to go to those, and I've learned literally from some of the best people in the world. Now, a lot of people don't have that opportunity, so I really want to pass along all of that information that I've learned. And the most basic thing that I have learned is that some people are natural leaders and some are not. So some people just naturally have the ability to lead and they just know how to do it, by their gut. And some really have to learn how to do it. Some have to kind of get into the nitty gritty of it and learn all of the little details. And then they take that and they become a good leader with it. It actually works a lot like musicianship and musical ability. Some guy can sit down and play piano for the first time ever and just do it and be really good at it, and you're like, I hate you, why are you so good at this? And you may be the person that has to sit there for hours learning one little thing, but there are plenty of people who are like that have become some of the best musicians in the world. A lot of people who are born with the ability to just do that, they often take it for granted and they don't learn as much as the other people that have to put a lot of work into it. And the same goes for leadership. Now, I personally didn't know that I could be a good leader until I was fresh out of high school. In fact, I'm one of those people that was born with the ability to be a good leader, and I had no idea that it was actually there. I had led many guilds and raids and just general groups of people from a pretty young age, if we're talking just gamer stuff in general, but, even stuff outside of gaming. And I never really thought of myself as a leader. In fact, I hated doing it, and for the most part, I was generally terrified of doing it. But why was that the case? Well, it all comes from the fact that I had no confidence in myself of being a leader. I had no confidence in myself in general for the longest time, and then once I found that, once I gained that, I started to understand, I'm actually a leader. This is something that I do. This is something that I've realized happens in my life fairly often as I'm leading people and they are following without question. And really, it wasn't until I started having confidence in myself that I really took the reins with leading and started doing it more often. So that was about the time that I went to my first leadership conference, and it's kind of a cool way to line up, because for me, understanding how certain aspects of leadership worked by having them explained to me by all these people who've been leading for years, these major companies of hundreds of thousands of people, learning the things that they were teaching me just affirmed a lot of the stuff that I had already known just naturally. But having that affirmed allowed me to gain even more confidence and kind of expand my skills as a leader and really, stretch my arms in the world of leadership. So with that being said, let's start talking about how you can determine who is a good leader and who is a bad leader, because it is a set of things that you can pretty much take to every single person who is either trying to be a leader or is already a leader, and you can judge them based off of that. Now, it needs to be said that I'm not making this video so you can discredit the leaders around you or the leaders that are already leading you. And I'm not here to make you feel terrible if you aren't a good leader. Like, if you look at these things, you go, actually, I'm none of those things. I'm a pretty bad leader. I'm not here to make you feel terrible about yourself. What I am here to do is just to make you aware of how to get better at being a leader. Or if you're having bad leaders, in your guild or in your raid team, I'm here to help those people become better. Because we all have the capacity to be better, it's just whether or not we actually put the time into doing so. But let's move on to the first thing that you can help determine whether a leader is a good leader or a bad leader. And the first thing is, does the leader have any followers? I think this instantly makes sense to most people. If you're a good leader, you're probably going to have people following you. If you're a bad leader, you're probably not going to have anybody following you. It just makes sense. If the leader has people who are willing to follow their lead, especially people who have been doing it for a while, chances are they're a sign of a good leader. And are the followers just following because, it's the only leader they have? You can actually determine this just based on the followers' attitude. You can just kind of use your gut for this, just talking to the people. Or if you're in a situation where you have only one leader and you guys are just following him because he's the only leader, are you following him because of that, or are you following him because he's an actually good leader? You can determine that just based on the people's attitude towards that person. Now, you may end up coming across some people who really want to lead but don't have any followers at all. And it's kind of like a big warning sign. Someone who's trying to get something together, like they're like, oh man, I really want to get a raid team together. I want to get a guild together. I want to do this. But there's not a single person behind that person. There's not a single person who's like, yes, I support you. I really want to, see you do this. I really want to see what your raid team looks like. I think you would do a good job. If there's not a single person doing that, chances are they're probably not a good leader, or they are just getting started. Which, they're fresh. They're going to need a little bit of work. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But strangely, you can actually, once again, trust your gut in most cases with this one. If you see someone's trying to get a raid together, a raid team together, and they're trying to recruit you, and you're looking, at the situation, you're like, something doesn't feel right about this. They're saying all the right things, but nothing is actually happening. There's nobody jumping on board with this. Chances are it's probably a bad idea. Now, I want to have you ask yourself this question. If you're a leader, do you have any followers? And if you aren't a leader, whatever leader you do have in your raid team, in your guild, anything like that, do they have any followers? If they do, chances are they've gotten the first step down. And I want to say this, even though the guy was an incredibly evil person, completely morally evil, Hitler had this part down, right? He was very, very good at inspiring people, in fact, an entire nation, to follow whatever he said. It was, like I said, he was a bad person, but he was a good leader in this sense. There's a ton of power and responsibility that come with gaining a lot of followers like he did, and it actually ties directly in with number 2 on this list. And number 2 is, does the leader make any good decisions? Right? You're gonna have followers is number 1, but the second thing is, do you actually make good decisions? This is a good sign of a good leader or not. They don't always have to make the best decisions. They don't, they're not the best mind-blowing decisions, and you're like, oh man, this guy is the best leader I've ever seen. No, they just have to be making good ones often. And again, your gut will help you with this. In fact, your gut will help you with a lot of things as far as leadership goes, because you're going to naturally want to follow somebody who is a good leader, and your brain will really kind of determine what's going on there. Are they making good decisions? Do they have followers? All that kind of stuff. So it's really easy to trust your gut on this. But if you have a leader over you, do you feel confident with the choices they are making, with the decisions they're making for the group? If there is a decision to be made, do you look towards that person to make that decision? Do you feel confident in doing that? Does that person also have the knowledge of whatever field they are leading in? These are all things that determine whether or not they're going to make good decisions. For example, if someone is a raid leader and they know all of the information about the current raid, about the previous raids, they can list off every single fight for you and just completely explain it. Chances are they know what they're talking about, in the field that they are leading, right? If they don't know that kind of stuff, they can still be a good leader. They just won't necessarily always make the best decisions. So there is kind of a toss-up here. Usually, really good decisions made by a leader are done because the person is well informed and knows what they are doing. So there's a two-parter to this. Sometimes they just make good decisions because they're a good leader and they can figure things out. Other times, they can just be well informed and kind of know where to go with that. Or it could be a combination of both, which is how the best leaders do it. For example, we'll start with an easy example here. Imagine a leader is asking whether or not the group wants to do Dread Palace or Dread Fortress first, if they're a raid leader, and the group can be either split down the middle, going one way or the other. They could be completely indifferent, or they could all be, saying like, oh, Dread Palace, let's start with Dread Palace first. A good leader will take that information and make the decision based off of it. There is definitely a line to be crossed here that you will notice some people will do, and it's a sign of a bad leader, which is no matter what, they will always take the consensus, regardless of what decision needs to be made, whether it's a group decision or not, or whether there's multiple decisions to be made or not. They'll always take a consensus, and they will always do what the group wants to do. That's not necessarily a good leader. That's just a leader who is not sure of what the heck to do, and he doesn't always want to be wrong, and he wants to put the responsibility on the group and not on himself. So keep an eye out for those kind of things. But with this specifically, what you want to ask yourself is how does the person handle, decisions that need to be made? And how do they react when they've made a bad decision? And we'll get into that in a minute, because that also ties directly into one of the other things that you could tell whether or not a leader is good or not. And at the basic level of leadership, especially in MMOs, really people are just looking for someone to make decisions for them. So this is kind of a very important point in whether someone's a good leader or not. But how do you do this? How do you make decisions? I want you to ask yourself that. How does your leader within your guild or your raid make decisions? And when they are making those decisions, if they make bad decisions, how do they handle it? That's very important to keep in mind. And the third note on whether a leader is good or not is actually kind of basic. Is your leader honorable? Or if they make promises, do they keep those promises? Do they avoid doing pretty shady things, between the different officers in your guild or your different raid leaders and stuff like that? Are they trying to steal players from other raids? Are they doing those kind of shady things? And does the leader abuse their followers, like as they verbally belittle people in front of the other parts of your raid, or they never encourage people when things are going bad or good? Are they being honorable with the position that they have? If not, chances are they're not being very effective at their leadership. And they may be a good leader, they just may be failing in this part of it, which is one of those things that you can easily improve. It's hard because it takes a lot of the confidence out of your followers with you as a leader. So just keep that in mind. And the question we need to obviously ask here is, you as a leader, are you honorable? Or are the leaders in your guild /raid /whatever, are they being honorable? But this all easily ties into number 4 on the list, which is your leader humble? So if you have a lot of followers as a leader, are you abusing the fact that you do? Are you abusing that power? Are you constantly referring to the fact that, oh, I have this many people who are under my leadership? You gotta be a humble leader to be a good leader. This is a fact. You cannot be a super proud, pious leader, because it's just gonna lead to very, very bad decisions, and then you won't have any followers, and it just kind of completely crumbles the leadership that you may have, to begin with. But if you are a leader and you have a lot of people, don't let it get to your head. If you are a leader and you don't have a lot of people, once again, don't let it get to your head. It doesn't matter if you have 1 follower or 50,000 followers. It's the same thing. You are responsible for that leadership position. You're responsible for the decisions that need to be made there. Yeah, the responsibility may have more pressure on it with more people, but it doesn't matter whether you have 1 or 50,000 followers. You're still a leader, and you need to be humble about the fact that you may have a lot of people following you. But a good determining factor of whether or not your leader is humble, or if you're a humble leader, is when a good decision is made, do you constantly point it out? Does the leader that you have in mind, constantly point the thing out, be like, oh, that decision I made, so good. Like, you guys, seriously, that decision was so good. Are they doing that? Or if they make a bad decision, which, ties back into the number 2 thing, are they making good or bad decisions? When they make that bad decision, are they making excuses for it? And do they never learn from it? Say you made a bad decision one night and you're like, oh, it was because of this, and you brush it off. Or when you make a bad decision, do you apologize for it? You say, sorry guys, that was a really bad decision. I've learned from it, I won't do it again. If they move on like that and they apologize, chances are they're being humble in that situation. But here's the other thing that you could tell whether or not someone is humble or not, is if they brag about the immoral, dishonorable things that they are doing or have done, and even directly belittling somebody and berating them verbally in front of the other members that you're, leading. So, for example, say someone is trying to steal someone from another guild, and they're constantly being like, dude, I'm totally going to get this guy, from this other guild because he's not happy with his guild, and we're going to bring him over here, and it's going to be awesome. If he's gloating about that, chances are he's not being humble about the fact that he may be a good leader and is, having influence of other people, or he is a bad leader and he's bragging about the fact that he is grabbing some guy's other person, and that's not honorable. That's not nice to this other guild. If he's bragging about being dishonorable, chances are he's not necessarily being the best leader. And let's go back to, the raid leading example. Say you're leading a raid and someone makes a minor mistake. You sit there and you call them out in front of everybody, and you make fun of them and you belittle them. That's not the sign of a good leader. If you need to do that to somebody, if you need to take them aside and talk to them, like, hey, you're making a lot of mistakes tonight, what's going on? Then you need to do that in private. You need to not do that in front of other people. And that is one of those things about being honorable and being humble. So once again, the 4 things that determine whether or not you're a good leader, or whether or not someone who is a leader is a good leader, is 1, do they have followers? 2, do they make good decisions? 3 is, are they honorable? And 4 is, are they humble? You can always take those 4 things and determine whether or not someone is a good leader. But it also needs to be said that regardless of what kind of leader you are, good or bad, there will always be people that think they can be doing better. So say you're a leader, you feel like you're doing a pretty good job. Everybody, in the raid group, the guild, the whatever you're leading, feels like you're doing a very good job. You're making the right decisions. You're being honorable. You have followers. You're being humble. But there will be one person, regardless of when it happens. It might be a few people, but they will feel like they can do a better job, even though 90% of the time they can't. This is for various things, that'll pop up within the personalities of people. And we'll talk about that more in the next video, part 2 of this. But 90% of the time, those people who feel like they could be doing better can't. But with that being said, hopefully you will take a few minutes and ponder these things, about either, are you a good leader with these things? Are you following these things? If not, then, think about how you can improve. Or if you have a leader that you have over you, are they doing those things? If they're not, how can they improve? How can you talk to them in a non-berating way, telling them that they suck? You want to do it nicely, and you want to do it gracefully, so that way you're not, hurting their feelings. We're all people. We don't want to be mean to each other. It's just, don't want to be rude. But in part 2, we'll go over of how to put these pieces together and how to figure out how to be a good leader, especially in Star Wars and MMOs in general. But with that being said, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below, and we shall see you guys next time.